Hello, I'm presenting a poster titled DC Public Libraries Are They Shelters for the Homeless? A neoliberal dystopia in the words of DC librarians. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Francesca Emanuele. I use she, her, hers. I am a PhD student in anthropology at American University in Washington, D.C. And as you have probably already guessed, I'm not from the US. I am from Peru. I was born and raised there. The first time I entered a library in the United States was in 2018. At that time, my immigration status was in a legal limbo. Learning at the entrance to the Shaw Neighborhood Library that no identification was required was reassuring. This is a truly public space, I thought. As soon as I opened the glass doors of the reading room, a pungent odor enveloped me. Disregarding it, I sat down, leaving my backpack on the floor, while noticing the dozens of bulky bags scattered under the other 10 tables in the room. I looked around and realized that most of the people around me were probably homeless. I immediately wondered why there were so many unhoused people in the capital of the richest country on the planet, and why, instead of being in public housing or shelters, they were here at the library. But a discussion between a homeless Black man who was becoming increasingly agitated and vocal, and the librarian who asked him to lower his voice, brought my attention back to earth. Days later, I read that a congressman from New York had introduced a bill called Life Saving Librarians Act to stock libraries with Narcan, an antidote for opioid overdoses, which are increasingly taking place in libraries. The bill was never brought to the floor, but it was then that I felt the imperative to study what was happening in the libraries of Washington, D.C. It occurred to me that perhaps libraries were going through a transformation pushed by the forces of capitalism and the specific logics of US neoliberalism. Months later, I confirmed my suspicions. The poster that you have on your screen is mainly a collection of the transformations that we are witnessing in DC public libraries. This account draws on 4 months of participant observation in 10 DC public libraries between August and December of 2019, along with extensive research on homelessness and housing in DC. But most importantly, the information presented in this poster comes in the form of excerpts extracted from 3 in-depth interviews I conducted separately with a Black male DC public librarian, a white female DC public librarian, and a white male social worker employed by one of the most important nonprofits supporting homeless people in DC. These excerpts are organized by topic. For example, the first 4 excerpts on the top left function as an introduction. Let me read you the first quote on the top left corner. When you come in the building, the majority of people are homeless, or homeless and mentally ill, or homeless and substance abusers. So of the 60 people in the building, 55 are homeless, said a DC public librarian. So here the librarian does not exaggerate the magnitude of the issue. In DC, a high percentage of daily library patrons are unhoused people. This number can be as high as 90% as in the example above. But adding complexity to the analysis, I would like to challenge something I hear often and I consider an oversimplification. The praise of libraries for welcoming the homeless. Let me explain myself using the third quote in the same left corner, taken from a different DC public librarian. It reads, I like to think that we are helping, but I think that in some ways we are masking some of the problems. Indeed, libraries are doing an invaluable job. They are acting as day shelters, which can be a matter of life and death for the homeless. But simultaneously, it's necessary to recognize that libraries are increasingly becoming repositories for a population that the city is avoiding its responsibility to assist. And this population is growing. Moving on, the section on the right under the title, Nowhere Else to Go. A librarian said, they come here because this is technically the last resort, right? They don't prefer to be here. They are just here because this is what is available. With this comment, we continue to debunk the idea that libraries are chosen destinations for the homeless. Let's think about it. Libraries are staffed with rules. It is not allowed to talk. You can't sleep, or you have to whisper. You can't sleep. You can't eat. Being there all day, every day, doesn't sound comfortable unless it is the only place you can go. And it is, even for the single and housed people who sleep in shelters. Under normal conditions, shelters in DC close at 8 a.m. and reopen at 5 p.m. In 2019, the only day shelter for real in DC was inaugurated, but its capacity is only 100 people, and there are thousands of single homeless adults in this city. That librarians have become the day shelters for the homeless is a consequence of neoliberal policies and processes, such as ongoing real estate speculation and the resulting gentrification, both of which contribute to the homeless crisis in the nation's capital, as well as the scarcity of public spaces and public services that have left DC, and particularly unhoused people, with almost no public indoor spaces other than libraries. Some data supporting these assertions can be seen in the middle of the poster in a long column titled Data. For example, regarding the lack of affordable housing in the district, I pointed out that to afford a fair market rent for a two-bedroom apartment, renters must earn $32 per hour, while the minimum wage is $14. But equally important in this analysis is the view of this issue through the lens of race. Black people are overrepresented in the homeless population in DC, and actually in the US as well. And racial dynamics in homelessness need to be addressed in order to investigate potential policies and possible solutions, but also to detect certain dangerous ripple effects within the libraries. For example, DC has its own library police department who patrol the buildings and respond to librarians' calls. In fact, some libraries have recently increased the presence of police officers inside their buildings. As you can see in this photo on the top right of the poster that I took in one of the DC public libraries, there is a policeman inside the building acting as a gatekeeper of the library. That is, there is a constant monitoring of homeless people by police officers, by the DC Department of Police Office. And interactions between vulnerable and dispossessed people with police officers increase the risk of their incarceration. Adding to this, we know that the risk of criminalization is much higher when the interaction is between a police officer and a Black person. And most of the people who are homeless are Black. Just as there are movements to reform policing across the country, the same issues exist with DC libraries, where police presence is growing. This is an unfortunate and even dangerous reality. Shifting focus to the librarians, it is clear that they are struggling too. Their testimonies reveal that they have to deal on a daily basis with populations who need more than they can provide. Let me read you some of their quotes. This appears in the section Nowhere Else to Go, when referring to the use of the library facilities, including bathrooms, by the homeless. Many people like cutting each other's hairs or like other, their stuff, sometimes without clothes on. Once I saw a guy shaving the calluses off his feet, said a DC public librarian. But librarians encounter situations that are even more challenging, like an opioid overdose in their facilities. One of the transformations in DC libraries I identify is that in 2019, librarians started to receive suggestions from the city to get trained to administer Narcan or naloxone, which are opioid overdose antidotes. In the section Opioid Crisis Hits DC Public Libraries, which is on the top right of the poster, there is the following quote from a librarian. I will probably do the training, but I also don't want it to be, well, go to the library to use opioids because it's more safe. That sounds kind of crazy, but I don't know. It's hard to know what the trajectory would be. Because of difficult situations like this, the presence and availability of the library police feels like a positive resource for librarians. On the bottom right of the poster, you will find this quote from a librarian. We call the library police every day pretty much. Sometimes someone is becoming a, let me start again. We call the library police every day pretty much. Sometimes someone is becoming aggressive or sometimes the situation could be unsafe. I don't love the idea of the library feeling like a police place, but that's what we have. So here we discover one of the paradoxes of the system. What is safe for the librarians may be unsafe for the homeless. And both the homeless and the librarians are trapped in a perverse logic with apparently no alternatives. Another transformation of the library appears in the section A Place for Everyone on the top right. A librarian pointing out that many patrons are deterred because of the increasing presence of homeless people in the libraries put it this way. This guy is hitting himself. What am I supposed to do? Or there's a person next to you fumbling around with heroin and you can see that he has syringes. You're not from that world. You don't want to be there, so you leave. A lot of people just leave. In the last section, an alternative, librarians advocating for themselves and the homeless, I explore a channel towards a solution. As librarians hold a more privileged position than homeless, they are unionized workers respected by the public, they could organize, demanding policies that end the homeless crisis in DC, a goal that would have a direct impact on their job and their well-being. When I put this idea on the table, the librarians I talked to were not fond of taking this type of active role. I understood later that a social mobilization led by librarians has sensitive components. For them, advocated to end homelessness could expose the vast expansion of librarians' role beyond their training. And such exposure could be misunderstood as complaints and a rejection of their commitment to help and even as possible evidence of discrimination against the homeless population. In the worst scenario, divulging the frequently heartbreaking conditions within the libraries or within the library microcosm could lead to disjointed solutions out of the neoliberal playbook. For example, greater police presence in libraries, accompanied by the restriction of entry into the buildings, with surveillance and control tools such as metal detectors and cameras, not entirely unlike what was proposed to curtail mass shootings in US schools. In parallel, closing certain library branches could be contemplated as an option too. Even with coronavirus and the libraries partially closed under lockdowns, the dystopian picture I have described in this poster will continue to unfold. Unhealthy dynamics within libraries will continue to worsen as public services continue to dry up and housing becomes more unattainable. And it will not improve until you, me, the librarians, the homeless, that is, all those who are not gaining but losing in this tragic situation, fight collectively within their capabilities to bring about a redistribution of wealth and the end of homelessness in DC. Thank you very much.